I'm Austin Hankwitz, and this is After Earnings, the show from Morning Brew and Stakeholder Labs that brings investors up close and personal with the executives behind the world's most interesting public companies.
Today, we caught up with Christian Angermayer, who's the founder and chairman of Atai Life Sciences. They are a clinical stage biotech company, a shroom stock, if you will. And they're developing solutions to solve some of the biggest mental health challenges and other problems facing society today, including the opioid epidemic. Christian told us about the trip that changed his life, and he also shed light on the history of psychedelics in the US, talking us through what happened in the 60s, what happened thereafter, and where we're at today.
Atai is in the final stages of getting their psilocybin drug approved by the FDA and on the market, now with Christian aiming for that to take place sometime in 2025. This interview was hilarious, as well as incredibly informative as someone who honestly doesn't really follow pharmaceuticals or has any perspective on the space. So let's get in the interview. Christian, thanks so much for joining us on this episode of After Earnings. Let's kick it off with, first and foremost, what is Atai Life Sciences? What products do you all make? Why do you make those products? And who's the intended customer of your products?
Okay, I try to be brief. First of all, thank you so much for having me, because that could already fill the whole podcast, because you obviously hit the most important stuff of a company. So first of all, Atai is a biotech company. That means we are developing medical drugs, pharmaceutical drugs, new ones to bring hopefully to market soon. But at the moment, all of our pipeline, all of our compounds are in clinical trials. And for the ones who are not familiar with biotech, you have to go through various stages, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 of so-called FDA clinical trials. And when you do that successfully, at the end, you're going to have an approved drug, which then is sort of sold for whatever it's made for. What is Atai doing specifically? We're focusing on mental health, which is sort of the sad and then hopefully at the end uplifting part, because we obviously or hopefully going to solve it. But the sad part of the story of Atai is that mental health has become the number one problem overall for the world, for the healthcare system, for people. It's sort of the number one disease in terms of number of patients, costs for the system. So you can almost say around about 20+% of all people globally are officially diagnosed with a mental health issue, which, by the way, means, unfortunately, that there are much more people suffering who don't come forward, because also mental health is still a very stigmatized topic. And it's not like, I don't know, cancer or whatever, where people regularly seek out help. Like, a lot of people suffer sort of in anonymity. So that's what we want to solve. So what is our cool sort of claim to fame? We were the first one, and this is why by far we are now the most important and biggest one, to have the idea to bring back so-called psychedelics into the medical world. What does that mean, or why do I use that bring back? Because some of these so-called psychedelics, like magic mushrooms, which the active ingredient is called psilocybin, LSD, ketamine, like some of these compounds had been medically used in the last century, actually for mental health issues. And then for a pure political scam, I think one of the darkest and most evil things the US government has ever done, under Nixon, they used the fact that hippies did actually, especially LSD and magic mushrooms, outside the medical framework. So technically it was illegal, because it was back then also a drug which had to be consumed in a hospital. So the hippies kind of did it obviously outside the hospital. But to be fair, and we can talk about that, looking back, the hippies did the good stuff, like the better stuff, than alcohol or whatever. And it also explains a lot where love, peace, and happiness and all of the hippie sort of movement ingredients came from. So, but the Nixon governments used it against them and said, oh, look at those hippies. They take psychedelics. This is bad, because it must be bad, because look, they go against our beloved President Nixon. And in order to show that, they made psychedelics really broadly illegal. And practically, think about that, they took away a very good medication from patients who needed it. However, back then, mental health was a niche problem, while now, it's a totally different topic, why is that, by the way? Like, why are mental health issues going through the roof? But like now mental health is sort of, as I said, the number one problem of our time. So our core idea in 2018, when we started Atai, and I was actually thinking about it since 2014, was there are these compounds, which, by the way, now this is to every retail investor, which is really makes us different to any other biotech company. We know these compounds work because they had been used in the last century as a medication. Mm-hmm. So why shouldn't they not work now? So our idea was, let's bring them back. Let's redo the data, because obviously the FDA said, look, you need to sort of do modern clinical trials, whatever. So we practically redoing all the evidence. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And obviously legal disclaimer, I have to say there could be surprising stuff, but why should there be? Like, again, like we're redoing clinical trials, which have been wildly successful in the last century. Yeah, and by the way, again, and then these compounds partly were used like for 10 years plus before they became illegal. So, and we're bringing back these psychedelics into the medical world. As a side note, then I stop. Yeah, but like, because I'm very, very passionate, and I'm very.
We can tell, man. We love it. This is awesome, and you're being interviewed, by the way, by outsiders. I don't know much about psychedelics. I'm learning alongside Katie right now, so I'm really eager to dive into this stuff. So I appreciate the thorough walkthrough.
Yeah. So, and before you go off this podcast and say, oh my God, this sounds also amazing, I might try psychedelics, I want to say one thing. I came to this business. No, I'm very open. Like, and again, I love it. I came to this business idea because I had a psychedelic trip with mushrooms in 2014, which completely changed my life. I was the most unlikely person to do that, because I was actually always very proud. I'm coming from Germany and Bavaria. People know Bavaria because of the Oktoberfest. And I have never, ever tried alcohol in my whole life. Yeah, I've never tried a cigarette. I've never tried weed. I've never tried cocaine. I had done nothing. And a very long story for a separate podcast. Really, friends convinced me over 2 years to try mushrooms. And I was like, no, I don't need it. I really credit my parents. I was always at two things. I don't think I'm dumb, and I'm a very happy person. So I was like, I don't need it, because the friends were telling me, look at the data, because I'm doing biotech. That's what my background is. So the friends were telling me, look at the data of the 50s, like these things can cure depression. I was like, but I am not depressive. Like, I don't need anything. Long story, I tried it, and it was hands down the single most meaningful experience and added value experience I had in my entire life. And I came out of this trip and was like, holy shit, if it's doing this amount of add-on positivity to me as a happy, healthy person, I can totally see how it has the potential to cure mental health issues like depression, anxiety, addiction. And that was sort of the story of Atai. Yeah. And again, and then I had, as an entrepreneur, I have the big conviction, we're just redoing the stuff. So why shouldn't it work this time? And we're solving one of the biggest problems, maybe the biggest problem of the healthcare system right now. So that is, I think, this is in one sentence, the huge opportunity of Atai.
Yeah, when we talk about the big opportunity, I'm curious what the prevailing theory is on the rapid rise of mental health issues in this country and elsewhere. Do you think it's attributable to more people being aware of these things and some of the stigma being removed, or is it there's something going on in the world, in society, that it's actually creating more problems?
Both. So I think it's two things. I think, yes, one definitely factor, and by the way, which hasn't fully played out, that means the numbers will just go up, is that luckily, that's a good thing, that we destigmatize mental health. So people come forward, celebrities come forward, talk about it, and that makes normal people more open to seek help. And that's definitely one reason that it was kind of more stigmatized in the decades before. But the second short version is, and I can elaborate if we've done, like, I deeply believe that the world we're building, and by the way, my background is I'm running my investment firm and building companies in tech and biotech. So I'm sort of part of the problem and part of the solution. Like, I deeply believe that the world we're building, which you and I maybe love, like with tech and our phones and Zoom, and we can do these podcasts and whatever, is amazing, but it's at the same time seems to be very detrimental for our mental health. And And so I think we need an antidote. So I think that one of the reasons why we are successful in what we're doing is that sort of the world, all stakeholders, the regulators, the politicians, the patients, the doctors, they all remembered there was something which seems to give our mind sort of, maybe you could even use it preventatively, by the way, in the future, sort of the support it needs in a world which is very detrimental for our mental health.
That's interesting. So basically what you're saying is like, it's not about reverting to the past with like being less online, less on our phones, using less tech. It's about building alongside that innovation, the antidote.
Yes, I would say like I'm just thinking we're like on a business podcast, but if I want to be, and I know some people might find it cheesy, but like, so my theory, and by the way, there's one effect, and talk about like, so psychedelics are inherently kind of spiritual. Like, so part of the healing process is sort of a deep spiritual mystical experience. So it's very hard to talk about psychedelics without touching sort of that realm. But sort of my theory about mental health is the following. So we have an immune system in our body, which helps us when we sort of have to fight viruses, bacteria, whatever, to overcome it. And I deeply believe we have an immune system for our brain as well, which consists of three factors. One is faith, the belief in something. It doesn't need to be an organized religion, but the belief that there is something bigger than life itself. And why? Because we're all deeply terrified of dying ourselves, and even more of your loved ones dying. You have maybe family, children, parents for sure, and you are afraid that something could happen to them. And that is sort of a nagging pain and nagging trauma. And by the way, we also forgot in the Western world, or even worse, we pushed out that to talk about that, I think. And by that, we make it even worse. So faith is one thing, which is, I think, part of our immune system. The second part of our immune system is purpose. Humans want to be part of something, want to be needed, want to know why they're here. And the third part, maybe the most cheesy part of it, is love. We are social animals. We want to have family, close family, and friends. And if you look in, again, especially the Western world, all these three components of our immune system are actually on the decline. Faith is on the decline because we kind of pushed it out by science, while I personally think faith and science are not at war with each other at all, but like less and less people are religious, spiritual. Then very important, right now, it's happening every day more as we speak, purpose is on the decline because people start realizing in a way built or functioning with AI and robots, what am I doing? Like everybody who drives a car for a living, by the way, more than I think 20% of all Americans, the job is related to driving a car. Wow. It's not going to exist in 3 years, 4 years from now. Yeah. Every worker in a factory, it's not going to exist. The robot's going to do it. Yeah. So I think, by the way, I'm an optimist. I think there are going to be new jobs, but for the moment, this is frightening people deeply because their purpose is evaporating in front of their very eyes. And then the worst we're actually doing, we kind of destroying traditional models of love, like families, schools, like whatever, where people usually found sort of their stronghold. Yeah. So practically all the three pillars of our mental health immune system, in my view, faith, purpose, and love, are on the decline. What do psychedelics give you? That is the interesting part. They actually give you exactly that. There is almost no one who comes out of a clinical trial with psychedelics and didn't have a kind of spiritual experience. One of the very common effects is that people come out of a psychedelic trip and really positively realize what do they want to do in life. And by the way, it sounds so simple, but reading all these thousands of people we're treating in clinical trials, it's astonishing how little people know about themselves, what makes them happy, what's their purpose, what they want to do, and that you realize in a psychedelic trip. And then the third one, almost everybody, including myself, came out of a psychedelic trip and says love is the most important thing. I know it's super cheesy, but like you start re-cherishing like relationships, and you see that this is actually what sort of is the essence, I believe, of our life. Yeah. So, and that is why psychedelics, I think, have these power. Now coming back to the business, just like in an unheard way, like the data we're producing shows that like with success rates of more than 50% for treatment-resistant depression. Partly, by the way, we have one trial going on with ibogaine against heroin addiction and opioid addiction. The success rate is partly more than 90%. Yeah, in previous trials.
Christian, can we dig into that one a little bit? Because when Austin and I were chatting earlier, we were both kind of like, this seems like a huge opportunity in this country, not just to like help a lot of people, but just from a business standpoint. And we were wondering if in your workings with the regulatory bodies and the FDA, is there more openness from those bodies to be collaborative with you and give you guys some room, given that the problem that you strive to help solve is so big in this country and only getting bigger?
100%. By the way, the regulators are extremely constructive. This is not I mean, people always think like, oh, because it's psychedelics. I know the opposite. Big shout out to regulators. Like they look, because by the way, and that is the disclaimer. Sorry, I forgot to say, like, because we did one important decision, which not just for business reasons, but I deeply believe in. Psychedelics are medical products. So whoever hears me speaking now and is like, oh my God, this sounds amazing, don't do it on your own. Yeah. First of all, it's technically still illegal, but psychedelics are then the most powerful, and that's how all of our trials are designed, if they taken with a therapist together. So this is not to be taken alone. So, and even not to be taken with a therapist standalone. So what we are developing is a framework where people who have mental health issues get therapy. And then as part of their therapy, really little in the middle, they have a psychedelic session with their therapist. And that together, therapy plus the psychedelic experience under the guidance of a therapist is yielding that enormous success. So that is just one very important point, because people are like, oh my God, like, shall I try to do it tomorrow? Like, it's important to do it with a guide in a legal framework. And that's what we're developing. And in this sort of setting, the regulators are extremely supportive because, by the way, because again, I can always come back, the data of the last century is sort of showing it, And then we have these enormous needs, and we're doing it very like carefully. We're doing it very compliant. We're producing rigorous clinical data so that we can once and for all prove it that these therapies deserve to be part of our healthcare system.
So what's the current state of that regulation process? I mean, what are you guys doing to sort of build awareness for lawmakers, educate them? I mean, how are you guys really trying to get this across the finish line? Like, where are you guys in that race?
Good question, because we don't need to do anything with lawmakers because it's not a political decision. It's not cannabis. We don't try to change any laws. What we're trying to do is produce the clinical data. By the way, like you do it for any other biotech company, for any other disease. And then if we produce the clinical data in phase 3, which I'm very confident to do, and by the way, again, in all the stages before we've produced it, then it's an automatism that the FDA, not a politician, the FDA as a regulator will say the data is that good, it's doing what it's supposed to do, like, we've considered everything, we're going to approve the drug. So it's not a political decision, again, because we don't want to legalize it. It's not cannabis. It's bringing a drug back into the hospitals where these drugs belong.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And so you guys walk through the different programs that you guys are working on right now and maybe where you all are in getting those sort of passed by the FDA. I mean, are we talking about next month, next year, by the end of 2030? Like, kind of lay out for our listeners where you are in that process and the different types of, specific drugs you guys are trying to prove the efficacy of.
Okay, so first of all, a little bit of shameless marketing. If somebody wants to look it up, go to our website, which is atai.life, atai.life. And if you go on programs, then you see all of our clinical programs for the various psychedelics. So the most advanced one is in a subsidiary which we actually spun out, which is called, it's a separate company, but we're still the largest shareholder. It's called Compass Pathways. So Compass is solely focusing on psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in so-called magic mushrooms. And Compass is, as we speak, finishing its phase 3. Actually, 2 legs. So one leg will read out towards the end of the year, the other one early next year. And then, so if everything goes as we all think it goes, that means psilocybin should be approved mid next year and being rolled out into the healthcare system. So we're talking about, for biotech terms, we're talking about very, very near term. So practically right before approval. And by the way, phase 2B, the last study was phenomenally successful. Yeah, so I would say the likelihood of a successful phase 3 is very, very high.
Gotcha. Okay. So
we go over the stages real quick, just because I feel like not a lot of people are familiar.
Yep.
Like stage 3, if you pass that point, stage 4 clinical trials, it's already in the market and you're still testing, right? So the hurdle you need to
No, stage 4 doesn't exist. Like you have stage,
okay.
It's very simplified. It's the following. Phase 1, normally you focus on showing if there are side effects. So a phase 1 study, that's the earliest clinic. So you have a lot of preclinical work but it's generally, by the way, we didn't need to do preclinical work for psychedelics because we didn't know already. So we did already know so much about it. But like in generally for any biotech company, there is 2 big things. There's preclinical. This means you're in animals, you're still like figuring science out. And then once you go into humans, you have these 3 phases, simplified: phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And very simplified said, it's the following. Phase 1 is focusing on side effects. So you're making sure that the drug hopefully doesn't have a lot of side effect. And if they have, you want to know which one. Phase 2 is focusing more on the efficacy. So in phase 2, you're trying to really show, is the drug doing what it's supposed to do and with which likelihood? By the way, that's when Compass, for example, with psilocybin showed that with, I should know the number, but please look it up because obviously I need to say the right number, but it was more than 50% success rate. I think it was higher in phase 2B. Compass has proven that psilocybin is curing treatment-resistant depression. And then comes sort of the phase 3, which is kind of another phase 2, just bigger, where the FDA says, and now once more, with more people. So
got it.
Because obviously statistically significance, whatever. But kind of, if you ask me, like after phase 2B, you already know a lot. So the most important stage normally for investors also to watch is phase 2B, because the phase 2B data tell you, does it work, And then phase 3 is kind of, I don't want to say repetitive, because obviously you gain more insights doing it with some 100 people instead of 50 people. But like normally it depends a little bit on the drug. I'm simplifying here, but normally like you already know where it's going. So and after phase 3, if the data is good, comes the approval.
Got it. So let's say we fast forward the calendars by 12 to 18 months. And let's say by Q3 or Q4, phase 3 for the psilocybin's wrapped up. FDA approves it. We're off to the races. How should retail investors be thinking about your company now that you have a product on the market? Like, for example, I think back in 2019, Johnson & Johnson had a product pass called Spravato, which is sort of like a ketamine nasal spray. And now they're doing nearly $1 billion a year in sales only 5 years later, right? So
yes,
that's awesome for them. I mean, are you guys hoping to see the same ramp up in sales? How are you guys thinking about that?
I think it's going to be better.
Once the product goes live. Oh, you think it's better than okay, let's talk about it.
It was actually for a while, and like I don't want to criticize JJ, but like what happened is so for the background of the viewers or listeners, so Spravato is a kind of, or is a version of ketamine.
Yeah.
And some people count ketamine as a psychedelic, some not. And I would always say it's a semi-psychedelic, because you have kind of an experience, but like it's not as deep, but it has very good effects on you. So I'm a big fan of ketamine. So, but what is the same of Spravato, or it's the scientific term S-ketamine, compared to all the other psychedelics we are doing, is that it has to be taken with a doctor. So it's the same sort of treatment framework. And it's, by the way, it's in mental health. It's the first time that this framework comes sort of to fruition in terms of that you have to do something with your doctor. People in mental health know, oh, you take Xanax, whatever, you take some pills at home. By the way, side note, what I'm saying now, that's maybe one of the main reasons why I believe Atai stock is way too undervalued, because sort of people still have that sort of what I say now, sort of that Spravato fear almost. Because when Spravato came to the market, it took actually a while. You say now, oh, it's making what is like $1 billion or whatever, like after 5 years. But actually the expectations originally were higher, quicker. Why was that? Because what we said before, the problem is so big that analysts at the beginning said, well, this should like, and by the way, Spravato works. Spravato is a great drug. So, but what my interpretation is that in an organization like J&J, which A is not doing so much mental health at all, but didn't have any understanding, and also, you know, sometimes you have to have access and really understand something. Like they normally do cancer drugs, whatever. They do the normal model of a pharma company selling drugs via the pharmacy. You take it home, you pop a pill a day. Yeah. So, and this is different. Yeah. Again, you have to go to your therapist, you do therapy, and it's part of that. So, and I think that, again, I'm happy that J&J did it at all, but like, I think they didn't at the beginning really know how to handle that, how to push it out, whatever. So actually, people were disappointed with Spravato, but now they see it's really going through the roof, because kind of it was almost by word of mouth. But I think J&J didn't do a great sales job. So
then
now
kind of bringing that back to you guys, talk to me about what your strategy is then. So when you do get approved, how are you going to learn from the mistakes of Johnson & Johnson and really have that awesome go-to-market strategy?
Well, first of all, we're doing nothing else than psychedelics. And as you might see, I'm really, really passionate about it. And I think psychedelics will, in a true way, change the world in a very good, because they have the potential to cure the biggest problem. And if you think about that, how much mental health, not just for the individual patient, how much is destroying families, whatever, like it's almost like, look, yeah. So I really think we have a sort of a mission. I believe in it. And that's why we completely focus on it. So that's already the big difference to J&J, where like Spravato was like from their point of view, a niche drug nobody really took care of. Then the second one is a little bit like, it's actually not so bad to follow J&J, because now actually all the therapists and doctors are used to that framework. So give it to J&J. Yeah, they pioneered sort of what we call the 2-hour window framework. Yeah, for, hey, you go to your therapist, you do a session, and then you can go home. So it's kind of already a little bit more established. The most important thing, though, and I just need to say it in a compliant way. So I have seen over the last 7-8 years, since I'm sort of working on Atai, yeah, I have seen like round about 50 personal friends. By the way, it's very sad and interesting, like how once you work in that topic of mental health, how many people open up talking about what we said before about stigmatizing and say, Christian, can I talk to you? Like, I actually have depression. And by the way, you don't see that. People can live with it, they can hide it, they can function, whatever. So I had round about 50 friends over the last 8 years plus who opened up to me about their mental health struggles, and who then have actually, because there are countries where you can do it, in Europe, in the Netherlands, and in Mexico, where there are very few countries globally where psychedelics are not criminalized. We're going to change it now in the Western world, but like, so people were trying, if they had the money, whatever, to go there and seek help. So I've seen that not just in our clinical trials, but really firsthand in friends of mine who got help by psychedelics. And what is the two things as an outcome? The one is like really almost all of them got help. Not everybody got 100% cured, but I can really say all of them got either cured or got significantly better, which is, by the way, unheard of for any group of medications. But equally interesting, literally all of them. I've never met a single person which has been personally helped by psychedelics in one way or the other. Look at me. Who doesn't want to talk about it, because it's such an inherently good and positive experience that you come out of it and you want your friends, family, maybe the world experience it. So I came out of it, of my first trip, and as kind of a consequence of my first trip and some others I did, I ultimately started Atai, and I'm here with you on the podcast to talk about what I think is one of the most important developments in healthcare at the moment. But not everybody wants to go to the world, but at least they talk to their friends and family. Why this is so important.
Totally.
This is
and speaking of talking about it, I know we've only got 15 more minutes with you here. So let's move into the earnings section.
Because financially, this is the biggest grassroots booster you can have for a product. Think about it. We have a product coming to market where everybody who uses the product will tell their friends and family. By the way, it is already happening. Meaning, you said you live in Austin. Go to a dinner. I bet that every second dinner, people talk already about psychedelics. You can go on Netflix, by the way, because I know we have a lot of time. Whoever wants to learn more how they work, there is an entire Netflix show about our work, which is called How to Change Your Mind. Or read the book. What I want to say, since Spravato, the pressure of society and sort of the society is eagerly awaiting psychedelics, which I think and expect once psilocybin is coming to market, and then the other psychedelics you find on our website, we're going to kill it in sales. And that is definitely not priced into the stock.
Yeah, so let's get into some of those numbers, but real quick before we dive into earnings, you said you're going to be transparent. I have a question. One phrase response. Which current world leader would you wish to have this experience if they could?
100% Putin and Zelensky together on MDMA would change the world. Yes, MDMA is a drug which people should do together if they have a conflict.
Interesting. Well, okay, maybe that'll happen someday. We'll see.
I am rooting for psychedelics to change the world. And for it to change the world, we though got to jump into the earnings section of the podcast. Ron, we've only got 10 minutes left with you here, man, but we do have a couple more questions. With the first one being, obviously, revenue is not the main focus for a company like you guys right now in clinical trials and sort of in this clinical stage. So what is the focus, right? Are you guys, as the retail investors looking at your earnings, what should they be looking at? Is it clinical updates? Is it cash position? Exactly. I mean, what should they be looking at as they analyze your earnings every single quarter?
So as I say, so we're not producing revenues yet. That will happen once we have the first approved drugs. So the most important one is obviously the clinical updates, like where are the various compounds we have in trials? And then looking forward, what is the probability of success? Hint, because they all have been medically used already, I think the probability of success is very high. Second, do we have the cash to do all the work we want to do? And Atai has a very solid cash position. So we're very well financed. So these are the two big numbers, clinical updates, and cash position. And then looking forward, what are the catalysts coming? And as I said, so psilocybin going to have the first phase 3 readout end of the year. We're going to have a very big readout for one of my favorite drugs, 5-MeO-DMT, mid of the year. So again, if you go on the Atai website, but these are the two big catalysts and then several smaller ones. That's maybe the third one. What's next, sort of what's coming in the next quarter?
That makes a ton of sense. And so what you're saying is cash positions looking juicy for Atai, nothing to worry about there. We've also got some really cool momentum from the psilocybin side of the equation. So revenue is around the corner in the coming, let's call it 12 to 18 months. So for the retail investor listening right now who's trying to analyze this company and understand what the next 12 to 18 months look like, on the surface, looks pretty healthy.
Very. By the way, post on. I can't say better. And I think the main reason why is Atai valued, I think, too low, comparably low. The one is in general, as the ones of the listeners who do biotech or invest in biotech know, biotech went through 2 years of shit. So the last 2 years were not pretty for biotech in general. Yeah, but Atai suffered much more than the market. Why? Because in times when markets go down, investors are afraid of novelty. Actually, in times when markets go up, they love it. Yeah, so we are a novel paradigm. Again, we're not the cookie cutter, take one pill per day. And I'm very proud of that because we're curing it. We don't want to make people dependent on any Xanax or whatever. Yeah, we're really changing in a very positive way the way how we treat mental health issues. But in times like that, for biotech, has nothing to do with Atai, just in the market we are, people don't appreciate that novelty. They're like, you know what, especially institutional investors, let me buy another cardiovascular company where I exactly know the paradigm. It's going to change. I think I think biotech as an asset class is one of the biggest opportunities because once interest rates come down, yeah, biotech is extremely interest rate sensitive. Biotech will go up, and then suddenly novelty becomes an asset again. So you see that already every day, by the way. In days biotech went down, Atai went down more, but in days biotech goes up, Atai goes up more. Atai is just like a sort of turbo, or at least one part of Atai is a turbo in the biotech market. And the other thing is, again, analysts are too, in my point of view, conservative on the expectations of sales once psilocybin is on the market, once the other drugs are on the market, because they're using this Spravato roll-up. And as I said before, I think we're going to do it much better than J&J, but the market is also much more ready back then as it was back then when J&J brought Spravato to market. So these are the two biggest reasons. By the way, the third one is, again, another shameless promotion. Like if people Google my name, which they should see somewhere here, yeah, Christian Angermayer, I have a Substack where I wrote a very long blog post about Atai, all what we discussed, and you have more details like why I really believe, and disclaimer, I'm talking my own book, I'm the founder, but I've been never more like convinced of something than of psychedelics. And I think aside of helping people, it is really the stock Atai is one of the biggest investment opportunities in the market right now, in general, but especially in biotech. So go on my Substack, then you can get the full read down.
I love it. Thank you so much for the breakdown. I know we've only got about 5 or 4 minutes left here with you. So want to ask a couple questions about, just more on the personal side. You talk a lot about longevity and anti-aging. Where does this come from? Like, I obviously want to live as long as I possibly can, but I'm also comfortable with the idea of dying when I'm older. So share with us your perspective about anti-aging and what you're doing today to stay youthful.
So first of all, by the way, we should just do a second podcast. I love this. Is my favorite topics. Like we can well, again, by the way, together with Atai, like what is the one thing every human being wants? We might be so different, but the one thing every human being wants, where we're all the same, we want to be happy and we want to be healthy. You will not find a person who doesn't want to be happy and healthy. And once you're happy and healthy, you want to live as long as possible. So by the way, this is coming back to Atai, why I think the opportunity is so big, because what we truly do with psychedelics, we're making people happy again, if they're not happy at the moment. But ultimately, that's another point I talk a lot in my Substack, is like, by the way, I think the market analysis is completely wrong because it's just looking for psychedelics at people who have depression, anxiety, addiction, which is obviously sort of the ones who need it the most. But like everybody who's listening right now, if I would ask you, are you truly deeply happy every day, or do you want a little bit of a more like, and by the way, profound, long-lasting kind of spiritual happiness? Who would say no? So I think over the years, not just people with depression, anxiety, addiction, whatever, will seek therapy and with psychedelics, but like people who take it preventatively. We, as I said before, we live in a very, very exhausting time for our mental health. So why wait till you're depressive? Why not saying once a year, I have therapy with psychedelics to make sure I'm not getting depressive in the first place? So I think the market, as in tech, it's such a normal word, total addressable market. The total addressable market for psychedelics is truly 100% of the world population. And so is for longevity. Nobody of us wants to age. Yeah. By the way, we kind of normalized aging, and we say, yeah, you get wiser. Yeah, what the fuck? Like, I want to get wiser, but like, I don't want to have the decay of my body. And by the way, I deeply believe that aging is a disease. It's actually not a single one. It's much more complex. So a colleague of mine in another company, who I'm very proud of, he actually defined the term hallmarks of aging. So he really was the one who in 2012 said, hey, we get it all. Till 2012-ish, people were looking for these one sort of key which starts and stops aging. And Manuel Serrano is his name, said, no, we get it all wrong. There is not a single disease called aging, but there are 12 hallmarks of aging. So 12 diseases which happen the older we get, stem cell exhaustion, metabolic dysfunction, whatever, and they together form the picture of what we call aging. So, but suddenly people like that's when I sort of started thinking about it. I was like, wait a moment, but these 12 hallmarks of aging, they are tangible, they are treatable. So the assumption is if we are able to solve and cure these 12 hallmarks of aging, then we will slow down and even reverse aging as we know it. And sort of will extend lifespan. So we're going to get much older. But especially,
so then what are you doing today to stay youthful, right? What are you doing today specifically to kind of push back on those 12 hallmarks of aging?
So at the very moment, there is not a lot of therapeutics you can take, because that's what two other companies of mine, Rejuveron and Cambrin, are doing. They're developing novel therapeutics for fighting these hallmarks of aging. However, there are 5 things which everybody can do and which, by the way, are extremely important. It's not like they are, for now, hopefully we really bring cutting edge solution in the future, but for now it's 5 things. The one is sleep. Yeah, if you don't sleep well and enough, it's really bad. And by the way, sleep is the only thing we know which is really rejuvenating us and which a lot of us are deliberately cutting short. It's really, so I always, when people talk to me and say, hey, what can I take? I was like, if you don't sleep well, don't even ask me. Or if you don't sleep enough, give yourself the time, the sleep, hygiene, whatever.
Sure.
Second is what I said before, but it is one of the most defining factors for aging and our life expectancy, social relations. You need to have close friends and family, cherish them. Yeah, people who are lonely in average die 7 years earlier than the same peers who have strong social relations, which is maybe one of the most, if not the most defining factor for life expectancy. Third is food, Mediterranean diet. Yeah. Not a lot of carbs, not a lot of sugar, ideally non-sugar, more fish than meat. That fourth one, very important, no drugs. And you might say now after this call, but psychedelics are therapeutics. The drugs we consume every day recreationally are the worst. And especially the number one killer and bad thing is alcohol. People are not aware how scientifically bad alcohol is. No alcohol. Ever. I've still not tried, and I have no intention to do so. And no cigarettes, whatever. Fourth is sport. Fifth is sport. You need to have 3-4 times a week exercise, both cardio and muscle. These 5 things together, regularly done with consistency, will make a considerable difference about your aging.
I love it. Thank you so much for breaking that down for us.
Yeah, and I feel like we could have a whole other podcast on that topic that we talked about.
Let's do a longevity podcast.
On what?
On longevity. Let's do one on longevity.
I mean, I have so many questions, but we don't have time right now. But thank you so much. This is so interesting. And it was also helpful to hear how the longevity piece of kind of what you're pursuing is tying back into the discussion around Atai and how those two things are working together. So really,
because why would you want to live long if you're not happy? By the way, again, this is so the core of what we are. And by the way, if people take one thing away of these podcasts, 2 things. I really believe Atai is a generational investment opportunity, but on the personal side, being happy and healthy and then loving other people and giving other people love is all what life is about. And then everything else is if these are the core pillars, and Atai is giving us a really solid boost for that.
I love it, man. Thanks so much for joining us on this episode of After Earnings.
Thank you for having me. Let's do one more.
All right, Austin, our first biotech guest, and we got off to a strong start with a shroom stock. What stood out to you from this interview?
Yeah, Christian, what a great guy. What an awesome storyteller. I think my biggest takeaway here was his optimism regarding, his new product hitting the markets. Spravato is doing almost $1 billion a year right now in revenue in only a few short years since they launched in 2019. And if Christian is able to get his drug to market faster than Procter & Gamble, then that's really exciting. There's a lot of reasons to be excited about that for sure as an investor. So I'm definitely going to keep tabs on them over the coming months and years, 100%.
And for me, this was the first time I was face to face with a biohacker longevity person. And I got to say, I think I judged a little bit coming into it. I'm personally here for a good time, not a long time. But he made some really compelling points. And what I thought was really interesting is how he layered this philosophical perspective he has on life with the science that he's building at Atai. And it was interesting to hear those two things coming together. I was also surprised to hear how closely companies like Atai are working with regulators. So government agencies, other players working alongside shroom stocks to solve some of society's biggest problems.
I was equally as surprised about that. I did not think that these regulators were so eager and hungry to find solutions despite these solutions being recreationally illegal. So it's super cool to see that sort of society has transformed a bit to be a little bit more accommodating.
With that being said, I'm Katy Perry.
And I'm Austin Hankwitz.
And this was the After Earnings podcast brought to you by Morning Brew and Stakeholder Labs.
Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this episode with a friend that knows a little bit too much about shrooms. We'll see you on our next episode.